Hey creeps, my name is Cameron and welcome to Library Macabre, where I talk about books, movies, writing, and all things spooky. And today I am here for part 3 of my vintage horror bookshelf tour. Alright, welcome to part 3. I'm going to put a playlist down below in the graveyard that'll link to all of my other bookshelf tours so that way you can catch up. But if you don't have the time to watch all of those, that's okay. You can still watch this one. You're not going to be spoiled for the last part. It's just books. So all of my vintage horror paperbacks from hell, if you will, are all organized by the author's last name in alphabetical order. This part of the bookshelf tour is going to be about this entire row from top to bottom. First up, I have a Del Abyss book. This is Shadow Man by Dennis Etchison. Really cool step back art. Another Dennis Etchison, we have California Gothic, The Death Artist, that's a leisure book, and The Museum of Horrors, edited by Dennis Etchison. Next, we have a few books by Ken Ulo. I think that's how you pronounce his name. This one's from Pocket Books. Again, we have some amazing step back artwork right there. The third book in the series, The Death Stone by Ken Ulo. Nocturnal, look at that cover. The House of Cain from Tor Books. A few books by John Everson. We have Sacrifice, Siren, and The 13th. Good old zebra books. We have Dream House by Christopher Fahey. Eternal Bliss, also by Christopher Fahey. And another one of his books, The Lisa Syndrome. Very old leisure book. This is The Burning by Jeff Fain. The Sharing by M.M. Faraday. Blood Island. This one's by James Farber. Yet another pocket book. Pocket books always had the best step back cover art. A UK title. This one is The Dance of Blood by Stuart Farrer. Really weird cover art, but I love it. Next are a few books by John Ferris. We have Son of the Endless Night. Look at that. Classic Paperbacks from Hell step back art. Nightfall. Scare Tactics. I'd really like to get a hardcover of this one eventually. And The Axeman Cometh, which I would love to read, hopefully soon. Night Hunter. This is book 1 in the series. It's a very rare series. I'm still trying to find the other books. This one's by Robert Falcon. Very cool, spooky, mysterious cover. Kind of reminds me of the first X-Files episode. Best Friend by Pat Feely. Deadly Friend by Keith Ferrario, I think. And Wild Violets by Ruth Baker Field. It's another zebra book. Gotta straighten up the books because my OCD is going out of control. Playtime by Morgan Fields. And The Long Dark Night by David Fisher. This is actually the movie cover. The book was originally called The Pack. The Stepchild by Joanne Fluke. Gator by George Ford. I love a good killer gator story. Hex by Robert Curry Ford. This one's published by Playboy. Dark Angel by Sean Forstall. I believe this one is really, really rare. Bishop's Landing by Richard Forsyth. Another Forsyth. Fangs. Another really rare book. Love's Unearthly Power by Blair Foster. Blood Legacy by Prudence Foster. The Vow by P.T. Foster. The Bureau of Lost Souls by Christopher Fowler. A couple of books by D.A. Fowler, who's become one of my favorite authors lately. This one is What's Wrong with Tamara. This is the sequel to What's Wrong with Valerie, which I just recently read. I'll post a review up there. Fantastic book. Really cannot wait to read the sequel. And then another one by D.A. Fowler is Flesh and Blood. I haven't read this one yet, but I'm very excited to. Bloodthirst by L.A. Freed. I love the classic vampire image on that one. Again, we have pocket books and their amazing step back art. This one is Crib by Harold Lee Friedman. Such a good cover. Let me show you that one again. Look at that. Oh, so good. Maniac by Stuart Friedman. The Summoned by Stephen Ray Fulgham. By the same author, we have The Forsaken. My only paperback by Stephen Gallagher, we have Valley of Lights. I've heard great things about this author. I do have another one of his books in hardcover. It's a UK hardcover. It's called October. Amazing cover art on that one. highly recommend you go look that up. The Angriff Technique by Tanita S. Gardner. Night Music by Sheila Bristow Gardner. This cover is kind of what I modeled my lighting after. I saw the cover of this. I'm like, yeah, I want lights in this color scheme. And I made it happen. The Crone by Bill Garrett. Frankenstorm by Ray Garton. Deathwalker by R. Patrick Gates. This one's published by Del Abyss. And another Gates book. This is The Prison, published by Pinnacle. And last for this shelf, we have The Judas Seed by Anthony Gentile. All right, so we're getting into the G's, and I have quite a few books edited by, Jeff Gelb. He did quite a few anthologies back in the late 80s and early 90s. So I have both books in the Shock Rock series. Fear Itself, 2 books in the Hot Blood series. I still need to get more of these. This one's called Stranger by Night, and this one is Fear the Fever. There's so many books in the series. I am only scratching the surface. Now we're getting into all of my Stephen George books. So the first one is Beasts. His books had great covers. I love how shiny the eye is. Dark Miracle, look at that. So nice. Dark Reunion. Mirror Mirror, which he wrote under the pen name Valerie Stevens. This is actually more of a suspense book. And Nightlife, which he wrote under the name Jack Ellis. He has a whole bunch of other books that I would really like to get, but these are the only ones that I have for the time being. Next, we have a Berkeley anthology. This one is called Ghosts and Things. Very nice old school cover art. Greeley's Cove. This is by John Gideon. I have heard amazing things about this book. People are always recommending it to me. I've heard that it is, I believe, a haunted house story, but it's really, really disturbing. I'm really excited to read this. Hopefully I can get to it soon. It is a bit of a chunky book though, so probably don't have time for it right now. Next is The Kindred, also by John Gideon. I don't hear about this one too much. I don't think I've ever seen a review on this. Has anybody read this? Is it any good? This one's about vampires. This one's Office Party by Michael Gilbert. This cover really disturbs me. Yeah, this one sounds really, really rough. Next, I have a very battered copy of Night of the Vampires. This one's by Raymond Giles. Cool cover. I'd like to get a nicer copy of this eventually though. Bad Room by Christopher Cook Gilmore. Rattlers by Joseph L. Gilmore. This is a UK book. By Kenneth Gerard, we have The Calling, a very early Pinnacle book. Another very early Pinnacle book by Kenneth Gerard is Altered Egos. Always loved that cover. It reminds me of Slappy from Goosebumps, of course. By Safira Jerome, we have Borrowed Flesh. By John Gotti, The Snake, and his other book, Nella. By Gary Gosh Guerin, it's a fun name, we have Rough Beast. Next, I have a couple more books from the Del Abyss line. These are both by Daniel H. Gower. We have The Orpheus Process and Harrogate. Next, we're going to be getting into my Charles L. Grant books. So he edited a big long series of books called Shadows. So I have Shadows 2 and Shadows 7. Okay, I had to move the camera down. Now we are moving on with the rest of my Charles L. Grant books. So we have The Nesting, The Grave, The Tea Party, and I've actually not read any of Charles Grant's books yet. I still need to go through his work, but I've heard really great things, and I hear that his books focus a lot more on, like the small town angle. It focuses a lot more on atmosphere, which I really like. That's something that I've tried to do with my own books, so I feel like he's gonna be a good match for me. So here we have After Midnight. Really cool cover art on that one. The First Chronicles of Greystone Bay. The Second Chronicle of Greystone Bay. This is Doom City. And if you are a fan of Charles Grant, please let me know where I should start, because I know Greystone Bay is like one of his towns that he writes about. So I don't really know like where I should start, but maybe you guys can give me some tips. The Orchard, Dialing the Wind. Look at that. That gives me a lot of Ray Bradbury vibes. Stunts, which I've heard is a really good Halloween read. And one of his later books, Chariot, which I actually got this from the dollar store when I was really, really little. I was probably 8 years old. And I saw this cover and I saw the tagline that said, "Reading this is a lot like watching The X-Files." And being a huge fan of The X-Files at the time, and still am, I immediately picked this up. I wanted to read it, and I never did. So it's been sitting on my shelf for years and years and years, and I have never read it. Some of you out there are probably like, "Cameron, how dare you buy a book and not read it?" But you know you've done the same thing before. Next we have Dollies by Pat Graverson. This is one of my favorite covers. Look at that. That is terrifying, because these dolls obviously look like dead children. It's just really creepy. We have many books by Pat Graverson up next. So here is The Fagin. Very spooky atmospheric cover on that. Sweet Blood, Black Ice, Precious Blood, and Gray Things, which I assume is about aliens. Here we have Satyr by Linda Crockett Gray from Playboy Press. 2 different editions of her book Siren. This one's from Playboy. It's the original first edition, and then the second edition published by Tor. And we also have Tangerine by the same author. 2 books by Michael Green. We have The Jim Jams and Dry Skull Dreams. And next are a whole bunch of books that are edited or co-edited by Martin H. Greenberg. So the first one is 13 Horrors of Halloween, 14 Vicious Valentines. This one's simply titled Mummy Stories, Back from the Dead, Dracula, Prince of Darkness. And if you're wondering why I have a sticky note over it, it's because there's some sticker residue that I've not been able to get off because it tore the cover. So if I use Goo Gone, it's just going to make the cover all soggy. So I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna put that over it so it doesn't stick to my other books. Vampire Detectives, White House Horrors, and more Phobias. I still need to get the first book. Moving on to some more zebra titles, we have X's. This is by Dan Greenberg. And I have a whole bunch of books by Stephen Grisham. So here is Moon Lake, Half Moon Down, classic cover. This is Dew Claws. And one of my personal favorite covers, Abracadabra, Night Touch, Demon's Eye. Got some step back artwork, Blood Wings, The Living Dark, and a couple of his later books. We have In the Blood and Haunted Grounds. Cry for the Demon. This is by Julia Grace. A few books by Catherine Meyer Griffith. Vampire Blood, Witches, and The Calling. Forbidden Garden by Diane Guest. Lullaby, also by Diane Guest. Got some more step back art. By Beverly T. Half, we have The Chanting. 2 different copies of The Witching. This one is the first edition, which is published under the name Colin John. And then the second edition is published by Leisure, and this is published under Chet Hagen. So I don't know what this author goes by officially, but they're both the exact same book on the inside. The Other Child by Michael Hale. 2 books in the This Dark Paradise series by Wendy Haley. We have This Dark Paradise, and the second book, The Fallen Angels. This one actually has some step back art, very much in style of V.C. Andrews. 2 books by John Halkin. We have Squelch, this is the US version, and then the UK edition of Slime. A Paperbacks from Hell staple, we have Keeper of the Children by William H. Hallahan. So good, man. Just so good. And we have The Coven by Jay Hampton. Moving down to the next shelf, we have a couple of books by Alan Lee Harris. This one is Deliver Us from Evil, which I read last year, and I did a full review about this. Loved it. I think this is a hidden gem. Fantastic book. And then also there's Let There Be Dark, which I have in my review pile. I have the newest edition from Capricorn Literary, so I plan on reading that soon. Abyssos, I think that's how you pronounce it. This is by Raymond Hardy. Rapid Growth, another Del Abyss book by Mary L. Hanner. Also by Mary L. Hanner, we have Premature. I believe this is another one that was featured in Paperbacks from Hell. The Diviner by Marilyn Harris. By Marcy Hadish is The Torching. The Rats by James Herbert. Its sequel, The Lair. The Survivor by James Herbert. The Jonah also by Herbert. And the last James Herbert book is Sepulcher, which no step back art, it's just a bunch of blurbs. Next we have a bunch of amazing books by Charles Higham. First one is Tales of Horror, Nightmare Stories, Spine-Tingling Tales, The Curse of Dracula. These were all given to me by a friend and patron of mine named Stan. So hey Stan, thanks again. Can't thank you enough for these. These are just amazing books. We have Spine-Tingling Tales, love that cover. And one more by Charles Higham, we have The Midnight Tree. One of my favorite covers of all time, Pranks. This one is by Dennis J. Higman. Look how weird that cover is. The Screaming Skull and Other Great American Ghost Stories. Next are a whole bunch of zebra books from Rick Hautala. So we have Moon Death, Moon Bog. Is that the sequel? Sounds like it's a sequel. Classic, Nightstone. Love that holographic cover, so freaking cool. Moonwalker, Cold Whisper, another holographic cover. Dark Silence. Moving down to the next shelf, we have yet another Rick Hautala book. This one is called Twilight Time. Shades of Night, The Mountain King, Moon Slasher by Donis D. Hawk. This one is published by Critics' Choice. And from the same author and publisher, The Occult Madonna. The Devouring by Douglas D. Hawk. I love this cover, I think because it kind of just reminds me of a Goosebumps book, I guess. From Zebra Books, we have Puppet Master by Barry T. Hawkins, another one that reminds me of a Goosebumps book, coincidentally. Dawn of the Vampire by William Hill, very shiny Pinnacle book. Cradle Kill by S.A. Hillman. Sea Cliff by Michael T. Hinklemeyer. By the same author, we have The Harbinger. Classic cover art from Pinnacle Books. This is The Gilgul by Henry W. Hockerman. Look at that. So nice. That is probably one of my prized possessions, as is this right here. This is Dark Advent by Brian Hodge. Another one that is really hard to find, especially in good condition, especially with all of the teeth intact. Like mine is in really pretty much mint condition, and even the teeth on this one have some bends. So I have to be careful that these don't get torn off. But yeah, mint condition copy, and even my teeth aren't perfect. That sounded really weird. We have Oasis by Brian Hodge yet again. Brian Hodge also wrote a book for the Del Abyss line. We have Darker Saints, and yet another Brian Hodge Dell book. This one is called Prototype. It's published by Dell, but this isn't actually part of the Abyss series. Hungry Eyes by Barry Hoffman. I have quite a few books by Barry Hoffman, but I've never read any of his work. So if you have, is he worth reading? Where should I start? Eyes of Prey, Judas Eyes. I believe those are all part of like a trilogy. And then we also have Born Bad, which is another Barry Hoffman book. Making Love by Melanie Tim and Nancy Holder. Dead in the Water by Nancy Holder. Necromancer by Robert Holdstock. And Electrical Outlet, Shadow Twin by Dale Hoover. Halloween by Gary L. Holloman. Also by Gary L. Holloman, we have Demon Fire, When We Dead Awaken by John R. Holt. 65mm, also by Dale Hoover. April Spell by Joanne Hope. She Devil by Louis Horowitz. Love that cover, so freaking cool. Blood Moon by Leslie Horvitz. Afternoon of the Gosling by Marlise Huffman. I don't see this one come up online like ever. It must be a really rare one. Next is School Days by Robert Hughes. This was published in 2 different editions at the same time, so we have the black cover and the white cover. By Blood Alone by Bernard J. Herwood. The Keepsake by Paul Husson. Bunch of books by Sean Hudson. We have The Skull, Slugs, classic. The sequel, Breeding Ground. Next we have Spawn by Sean Hudson. This is the one that I get the most questions about because it is featured in the intro. At least it was in my old intro. I've kind of changed it up now. This was featured in that intro, and I got questions pretty much on every video being like, what is that book? What is that cover? It is Spawn, which is a classic Paperbacks from Hell staple. Erebus, Village of the Damned by Sean Hudson. Death Day by Robert Neville, who is also Sean Hudson. Relics by Sean Hudson. This is actually a UK edition published by Star. And another UK edition, we have Purity. Lastly, we have this final shelf, and then we are done with this row. So we have Jericho Falls by Christopher Hyde, as well as his other book, Styx, which is published by Playboy. And here we have a headline UK edition of his book, Egypt Green. Very interesting cover on that. The Prediction by John Hyde. Blood Fever by Shelley Hyde. Look at that. So creepy. The Devil's Breath by Robert Irvine. Great title. The Werewolf's Revenge by Richard Giacomo. Not a great title. The Void by Terry A. Jacobs. Croc by David James. This is the UK edition. The Language of Fear by Del James. Blood Mist by Robert James. And Then Came the Darkness by Ellen Jameson. The Hiding Place by J. Robert Janes. Love this cover. I don't usually like covers that have models on them, but this is just perfect, from the axe to the look on her face. So good. Paperbacks, they were a great publisher. This next one is technically considered a fantasy book. This is Shadows in the Watchgate by Mike Jeffries. It's just such a creepy cover that I went ahead and just put it in the horror section. Wounds by Jemiah Jefferson. Vampire by Jan Jennings. And now we are looking at my coveted Ruby Jean Jensen section. Still have a lot to get, but I do have a nice little selection of her books. We have The Lake, which she wrote under R.J. Jensen. A very battered copy of Mama. Chain Letter. House of Illusions, featuring a full holographic cover. That was what was considered revolutionary at the time. Here we have Jump Rope, Baby Dolly, The Living Evil, a pretty common one, Vampire Child. I feel like if anybody has any Ruby Jean Jensen books, they usually have this one. Same for this one, Night Thunder, it's pretty common. And Home Sweet Home. So that is the very last Ruby Jean Jensen book and the last book for this shelf. In the next part, I will have all of my William W. Johnstone books, of which I have most of his books. Thank you all so much for watching this part of my vintage horror bookshelf tour. Don't forget to check back for more. I will have part 4 up very, very soon, as well as multiple other bookshelf tours of my entire library. Thank you again for watching. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and I will catch you in the next one. Later, creeps.